Greetings! So today's video will be about a new bundle of art supplies from StationeryPal. They are having great deals for Black Friday and they proposed that I take a look at their supplies and make a new video featuring them. Again, as with my previous orders, the box I received was super well packed, and I really love their seasonal special boxes. I keep them to store supplies and things around the studio. They're really handy. There was a generous amount of freebies, like a small Christmas stationery set with pencil, ruler, eraser, all that. Cute bunny brooches, a clip, pens, a squeaky ducky, and more. I'm setting the box aside so it's easier to see. First items out are a trio of water brushes in different sizes. Then I have a waterproof fine liner in 0.05, which is the thinnest width. Third item out is a mini plastic palette for mixing. I took this opportunity to get 4 more of these small folding crates for various storage. I really like these, they're super handy, super practical, and I always have a few of them around my desk storing various stuff from clips to tapes to brushes to bottles, all that. Then I have 2 watercolor paper blocks from Bauhong. These are different weights and texture. As for art making itself, I got a set of coloring pencils from Sakura. It has 24 pencils and 1 sharpener. I really like the tin, I think it's super pretty. And finally, I got this set of watercolor from Faber-Castell with 36 colors in a travel palette. Now this set you might have not seen before. I think it's only available for the Asian market. I started by testing out the paints and painting swatches. I filled in the chart included with the palette. So far, it's a really nice range of colors and they behaved really well on this specific paper. The palette itself has an interesting design. The bottom section has a tray for the paints and room for a water brush. The top section is divided in 6 areas for mixes. This palette is plastic, so it did stain from the paints, but the top lid, interestingly, is removable. I'm struggling a bit with it here as I'm filming at the same time, but it's a really simple system. You just push it one side and it detaches. I really like this idea for a travel palette. It makes it much easier to clean and maintain this way. It's quite simple to pop the lid back in, you just do the reverse step. There's a handy thumb ring under the palette to use this for plein air painting. So you could have your palette in one hand and separate the mixing area to put it elsewhere. I also painted 2 more charts. The smallest one is on cotton paper. I added black stripes to see if the colors are opaque or not. Many of the colors are semi-opaque, many are transparent. I also painted a 3rd chart on cellulose paper this time. I think the paint behaved well on all 3 papers. The only thing I noticed that was unusual for watercolor paints is that the pigments lift off, like it would do with gouache. Usually watercolor pigments, they stay put, and it's the gouache pigments that have a tendency to lift off. I swatched the pencils and I quite love this color selection. These will lift off as well, but that's more common with pencils. That's something that's really recurrent with color pencils. I did a mini test on a scrap of paper to test out the Christmas pencils, the Christmas eraser, the Christmas pens, and the fine liner. Turns out, the tiny eraser is really not that bad. And both the fine liner and the pens were waterproof on my test, which I did not expect. I expected the fine liner to be waterproof because I knew it to be, but I didn't expect the pen that they gave me with the box to also be waterproof. I started drawing on the paper pads. Like I said, I decided to use the pencils from the little Christmas set to do the sketches. Next, I inked the sketches with the very thin fine liner. I let that dry. I couldn't find the small Christmas eraser when it came the time to erase the lines, so I picked an eraser I got from a previous StationeryPal haul. Then I took the paints and added a main flat layer of color. My idea was to work this way. So once the sketches are inked, I put in a layer of color with the paints, and when that's dry, I use the pencils to add details and more color. The paints went on rather well. I can't say for sure if the paper or the paints or both make for this sort of patchy texture. It's not exactly unpleasant, I like it, but it might not be what one is after. Also, I used the water brush to paint and it wasn't always very precise. I ended up painting outside the lines more often than usual. So, like I said, I use the water brush to paint my demos. I've mentioned many times before that I'm not super fond of water brushes, but I wanted to try and see what happens when they are used with no water in them, like you would any regular brush. I ended up only needing one size for my paintings. It worked generally super well. The only issue I ran into is that at some point, some of the hairs in the tip of the brush became longer and they made controlling where the paint would go really difficult. So I gave it a trim. For the first piece here, I used the thinner 200 GSM paper. It is cold press and 100% cotton. For the second piece, I used the thicker 300 GSM paper. This one is hot press, so it's smooth, and it's also 100% cotton. Also, if you look at both papers, the hot press one is a bit more of a cream color than the other paper. None of these are bright white, but the cold press is kind of natural white, and the hot press seems to be a bit more cream in color. The hot press paper is noticeably smooth, and as such, it has less texture, and when you use colored pencils over it, it makes for a more even application. Lastly, I wanted to use the small tools included with the paper to help separate sheets from the blocks. These pads are what we call blocks, so they are glued on all four sides except for a small area on one of the long sides. The trick is to carefully insert the pointy part of the tool they sent along between sheets where there's no glue, and to slowly go around, separating the topmost sheet from the rest. It worked well on both pads. Overall, I really had a great time with these supplies. The paper is super duper great. I think it's my favorite element here. The pencils and the paints are maybe a bit more on the fence of being, student grade supplies, but they still work really well. The only thing to keep in mind is the smudginess, and you have to be careful for that. It's something you have to be careful with any kind of colored pencils, so that's not specific to these supplies. Like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, this is a video in collaboration with StationeryPal for their Black Friday events. I'll put all the info in the description, including discount codes and all of that, and I highly encourage you to check it out. Like I said, these are really fun supplies and the paper is really, really nice. A big thank you to StationeryPal for sending me these supplies to take a look at and to review, and also a big thank you to you guys for watching this video. What do you think? Which is your favorite supplies from this bundle? Let me know in the comments below. Take care, bye bye.